Once a dominant force in Russia's car market, Hyundai was a familiar sight on city streets from Moscow to Vladivostok. The company's vehicles became synonymous with reliability and affordability, winning over Russian drivers and earning a reputation for quality that few could match. But today, Hyundai now stands on the outside, its flagship St. Petersburg plant under new ownership. The factory, once a symbol of South Korean industrial ambition in Russia, has changed hands, marking a dramatic shift in the country's automotive landscape. The war in Ukraine and ensuing sanctions forced Hyundai, like many multinationals, to make a costly exit. The sudden geopolitical upheaval sent shockwaves through the business world, leaving companies scrambling to adapt to a new reality where international operations could be upended overnight. Before the conflict, Hyundai and its sister brand Kia were market leaders in Russia, selling over 400,000 vehicles in 2019 alone. Their cars were a common choice for families, taxi drivers, and young professionals alike, reflecting the brand's deep integration into Russian daily life. The St. Petersburg plant, capable of producing 200,000 cars a year, was the heart of this success. It provided thousands of jobs, supported local suppliers, and helped Hyundai build a strong foothold in one of Europe's largest car markets. But as sanctions tightened, supply chains and financial flows were shattered. Essential parts became impossible to import, and payments were blocked or delayed. The once bustling factory floor grew quiet, and the intricate web of logistics that kept production running simply unraveled. By March 2022, the factory fell silent. Workers who had once taken pride in building cars for the Russian market now faced uncertainty, as mounting losses left Hyundai with no choice but to sell. The decision was painful, but inevitable. The sale marked not just a financial blow, but the end of an era for Hyundai and a wave of global brands leaving Russia. It was a stark reminder of how quickly fortunes can change in a world shaped by conflict and political risk. For Hyundai, it was a strategic retreat, an attempt to cut losses and protect its global business in an increasingly unpredictable environment. The company joined a growing list of corporations forced to reconsider their presence in Russia, each departure leaving a mark on the country's economy. The buyback option they negotiated now seems out of reach, as the ongoing conflict and sanctions make any return unlikely. This highlights the lasting impact of the war on global business, where even carefully crafted exit strategies can be rendered meaningless by events beyond anyone's control. Hyundai's Russian chapter is now closed, its legacy a casualty of geopolitics and a stark lesson in the risks of global expansion. The story of Hyundai in Russia serves as a powerful reminder. In today's world, business success can be as fleeting as the political winds that shape it. In 2024, Hyundai's St. Petersburg plant was sold to AGR Automotive Group, a Russian firm absorbing assets from departing foreign automakers. The price? Just 140,000 won, about 97s, a symbolic sum reflecting Hyundai's desperation to exit. Holding on to the plant risked nationalization and ongoing losses, so the sale was pure damage control. Hyundai reported a $208 million loss from the divestment, crystallizing the cost of leaving Russia. AGR, now a key player, is repurposing these advanced facilities for Russia's isolated market. For Russia, keeping factories running is both economic and political theater. The sale was more than a business deal. It marked Russia's pivot from Western integration to self-reliance. Hyundai's legacy was handed over, its future in Russia left uncertain. Despite the sale, Hyundai secured a buyback option, a right to repurchase the plant within 2 years. This clause was a hedge, a faint hope that the geopolitical climate might improve. The window closes in January 2026, but as the deadline nears, the option feels more like a reminder of lost opportunity. The buyback was always a bet on peace and the lifting of sanctions. For Hyundai, it was a way to keep a foot in the door, should the world change. But rights mean little when global politics hold the key. As the deadline looms, the buyback clause is powerless against the realities of war and sanctions. The door Hyundai left ajar is now firmly shut. The war in Ukraine is the immovable barrier blocking Hyundai's return. Since the conflict erupted, the region has become a flashpoint for global instability, with ripple effects felt far beyond the battlefield. For Hyundai, the consequences are not just about lost business. They're about navigating a landscape where every move is scrutinized and every decision carries enormous risk. Western sanctions have isolated Russia's economy, making any re-engagement impossible for companies like Hyundai. The sanctions are sweeping, targeting not only financial institutions, but also the daily operations of foreign businesses. Offices that once buzzed with activity now stand silent, their doors closed indefinitely. Sanctions ban the export of technology and parts, and cut Russia off from global finance. Supply chains have ground to a halt, and the flow of essential components has dried up. Even the most basic transactions are now fraught with legal and financial peril. Restarting the plant would violate these restrictions, risking massive fines and blacklisting. The threat isn't just theoretical. Companies have already faced severe penalties for even minor breaches. For Hyundai, the cost of a misstep could be catastrophic, both financially and reputationally. Hyundai insiders admit, it's not a situation where we can buy back the shares. The uncertainty has left employees and executives alike in limbo, unsure of what the future holds or if a return is even possible. The only path back is a fundamental geopolitical shift, an end to the war and sanctions. Until then, the doors remain closed, and hope hinges on diplomatic breakthroughs that seem distant. Even with political changes abroad, the sanctions architecture remains. Laws and regulations are slow to change, and the process of unwinding restrictions is complex and uncertain. The buyback option is now just a theoretical right, rendered useless by global politics. What was once a safety net for Hyundai has become little more than a legal footnote, gathering dust as the world waits for resolution. Hyundai is paralyzed, watching the deadline approach with no real options. The company's future in Russia hangs in the balance, dictated by forces far beyond its control. The war has drawn a red line no responsible company will cross. For Hyundai, and for many others, the only choice is to wait, and hope for a day when peace and stability return. Hyundai's story is echoed across the industry as global automakers flee Russia. Renault, Nissan, and Mercedes-Benz all negotiated buyback options, but none expect to use them. Toyota and Volkswagen exited without any buyback rights, signaling a permanent break. Mazda was the first to let its buyback option expire, setting a precedent Hyundai is likely to follow. This mass exodus marks a dramatic reversal of decades of globalization and investment in Russia. The war dismantled a thriving ecosystem in months, leaving abandoned factories and expired options. The consensus business in Russia is now economically, ethically, and politically untenable. Hyundai's former plant is alive again, now under Russian control, producing cars branded as Solaris. The Solaris name, once Hyundai's bestseller, is now used to market rebadged Chinese vehicles. This rebranding is Russia's new norm. Foreign factories assembling Chinese kits to keep production alive. It's a step back technologically, but politically, it projects resilience and self-sufficiency. The plant is now a screwdriver assembly line, not a hub of innovation. For Hyundai, seeing its brand repurposed is a bitter reminder of what's been lost. The new Solaris is less a symbol of Korean engineering, more a sign of Russia's growing dependence on China. As Western and Asian automakers left, China filled the void in Russia's car market with astonishing speed. In 2024, Chinese brands captured over 60% of new car sales in Russia, nearly 1 million vehicles. Once niche, Chinese cars are now mainstream, filling showrooms once dominated by Hyundai and others. Chinese firms supply vehicle kits and technology, enabling Russian factories to keep running. It's a win-win. Russian firms stay afloat, Chinese automakers gain a captive market. For Hyundai, even a future return would mean facing entrenched Chinese competitors. The Russian market is now reconfigured around Chinese brands, making a comeback daunting and costly. The dragon now rules the road in Russia. As 2025 draws to a close, a quiet but significant deadline approaches for Hyundai. The company's buyback option for its Russian plant is about to expire, not because Hyundai lacks the desire to reclaim its former asset, but because the world has changed in ways that make such a move impossible. The ticking clock is a reminder of how quickly circumstances can shift, turning once viable business strategies into distant memories. The ongoing war in Ukraine and the ever-tightening web of international sanctions have made the idea of repurchasing the plant not just difficult, but unthinkable. The risks are no longer just financial, they are political, legal, and reputational. Officially, Hyundai has not made a public decision. But behind closed doors, insiders acknowledge what is now obvious. The buyback option is effectively dead, a formality with no real chance of revival. Triggering the buyback clause would mean defying the coordinated stance of international coalitions. It would risk severe penalties, legal battles, and a backlash that could damage Hyundai's global reputation for years to come. Even if it were possible, the reward is uncertain. The Russian market has changed dramatically, volatile, unpredictable, and isolated from much of the global economy. Re-entering now would be a gamble with little promise of success. Extending the buyback option might seem like a way to keep hope alive, but in reality, it would only prolong a period of uncertainty and indecision, leaving Hyundai's future in limbo. By letting the option expire, Hyundai can finally close this chapter and redirect its focus and resources to more stable and promising markets elsewhere in the world. The deadline will pass quietly, without fanfare or headlines, but it will mark the true and final end of Hyundai's Russian venture, a moment of closure after years of uncertainty. The loss is now permanent. The factory, once a symbol of Hyundai's ambitions in Russia, has been transformed and now produces Chinese-branded Solaris cars, a stark reminder of how quickly fortunes can change. For Hyundai, the ticking clock is more than just a deadline. It's a countdown to accepting a loss that was sealed the moment the first sanctions were imposed, and a lesson in the unpredictability of global business. Hyundai's Russian saga is a cautionary tale of how geopolitics can erase decades of investment overnight. The inability to exercise the buyback isn't a business failure, but a sign of a world where political risk trumps strategy. Even if peace returns, Hyundai would face a market dominated by Chinese brands and outdated facilities. Re-entry would require massive investment and careful navigation of reputational risks. The memory of the war and the reasons for leaving would linger, complicating any comeback. Ultimately, Hyundai's future in Russia depends on decisions made in world capitals, not boardrooms. Until peace is achieved, Russia remains off-limits. The St. Petersburg plant stands as a symbol of lost assets and a future indefinitely postponed.